Welcome to Talk Dizzy to Me, the show that brings you a comprehensive look into the complex field of dizziness. Now, here are your hosts, vestibular physical therapist Dr. Abby Ross and Dr. Danielle Tate.
Welcome to another episode of Talk Dizzy to Me. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Dr. Abby Ross. I'm Danielle Tate, and today we have a really special guest, Sarah Renberg, who we are very excited to have on here. Sarah and I met a couple of years ago as she was in the thick of it in her journey through recovering from concussion and traumatic brain injury. And Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little background on who you are?
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Renberg. I'm currently a senior at the University of Michigan in the honors program studying biopsychology, cognition, and neuroscience. And I also do some concussion research up at Michigan. I'm the former program development coordinator at the Headway Foundation, but have since moved on into more of an advisory role to prioritize my studies. And I have threatened to puke on Danielle more than the average person.
So you kind of already segued, but obviously this is a vestibular-based podcast, Talk Dizzy to Me. What brings you on this show?
Well, to put it bluntly, I was shoved headfirst into a wall more than once. I was an ice hockey player in the Junior Women's Hockey League and being recruited to play in college, and that was sort of the dream. And I took a couple of bad hits over the years, and it really culminated into in October of 2014. I took what parents describe as one of the worst hits they'd ever seen, and that sent me down into a tailspin. So a couple morals to that story, which is first and foremost, continue to play if you suspect that you might have had a concussion, because it can create a whole host of problems. And the second is to just value every chance you get to play the game.
I'll be honest, I haven't had many other patients have the extent of injuries that you've had from this brutal sport. But you're absolutely right. It can be safe as long as you look out for yourself and you are able to pull yourself out of the game if you feel like you've had some sort of an injury. The one thing that I think is great nowadays is how much more awareness is being brought to concussion and traumatic brain injury and its role it plays in sports. And I think it's still so important to speak on it because everybody has a different experience. And you can hear everything from a very mild experience to a very significant experience. And I would say, to put it lightly, yours was very significant, to say the least, at even a huge pivotal point in your life and time, and kind of changing the trajectory of what you had planned for your future. But we're really excited to have you here today because we know that there are a lot of things that you bring to the table of good news and hope for a lot of patients suffering from the same thing, as well as some tips and management strategies and some really good advice for people that might be going through the same thing. So again, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. And what can I say? I like to be competitive in every aspect of my life.
To say the least. I mean, it was so much to keep you under control in the clinic, to keep you from doing too much. You were one of those patients we had to rein in because you were biting at the bit. You wanted to get going, which was good to a degree.
So, Sarah, we know you had some vestibular rehab during your recovery. What were your primary symptoms that you and Danny and anyone else on your healthcare team were addressing?
Yeah, so I guess with the career-ending injury, my vestibular issues were pretty apparent from the get-go. So yeah, there was just an endless vomit. I pretty much started throwing up, and then it didn't stop. I was pretty much nauseous all the time for like 4 to 5 years. I had headaches, every vision issue in the book. I probably set records at the vision therapy. I had a neck injury, which I actually had to wear a cervical collar for, I think it was like 6 or 7 weeks. And so when my brain was healing in that initial time span, my brain was healing frozen, which is a bit of the reason why I had a lot of issues later on. I had extremely severe autonomic nervous system dysfunction, and was later diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, nerve inflammation. Pretty much, if you think about it, I likely had it.
Things you would never think of either. I mean, I remember one of the issues that we had was you were really trying to get running again and get back to getting in shape. And you were planning to run a half marathon, and you would go blind every time you started running. So that was a little bit of an issue that I don't think I would have ever anticipated with working with a patient. So even the things you couldn't imagine were happening as well.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I also didn't really have great feeling in my whole right leg. I had tremors. Yeah, it was not a great time. And the POTS, the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, that comes with its whole slew of terrible. But we made it here today, and I actually did complete the half marathon. It was just 3 years later.
I was just going to give an update on that. I saw you post that, and I was so excited and so happy when I saw it.
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, it was. I did not think that through, but it was a good experience, and everyone cheered me on, and I actually raised over $6,000 for the Love Your Brain Foundation.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. Congratulations on finishing the half marathon, because I haven't done that, and I haven't had the injuries or symptoms that you have.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a couple days after the 5-year anniversary, and it was a really meaningful moment for me and my family, because at diagnosis, I couldn't even stand up for more than 5 minutes without threatening to pass out, and relearning to walk correctly between parallel bars, and having that neon hold belt on you all the time, and being in there with 75, 80 old people, but being 16. So it certainly was a journey. But it just shows that, you can do anything you put your mind to.
That's right. Now, also, I mean, you're so well spoken today. I know that this was not always the case, I'm sure. Can you touch on your cognition and how that was impacted?
Yeah. So this, I think, is where I struggled most, also from an emotional sense, because if you break your arm, tear your ACL, the rest of you still works fine. And with a brain injury, that's just not the case. And at the time, I was in high school trying to be recruited to play in college, pretty competitive. And my family strongly values academics. And I was a little bit competitive in that too. And I genuinely love learning. I've loved learning since I was a kid. I'm definitely one of those. I actually earned the nickname Webster on one of my earlier hockey teams because I sounded like a dictionary. And so
that's a compliment.
Yeah. Well, at the time it wasn't. Or I didn't take it as such. But when I, got hurt, all of a sudden I couldn't read. Something so rudimentary was all of a sudden so challenging. And I remember sitting in my AP English classroom, trying not to throw up, trying not to pass out, and just sort of staring at this piece of paper like I was supposed to do something. I ended up having, I really owe everything. And the fact that I even graduated high school to my mom, who pretty much dropped everything and read me my homework and did everything with me and fought the school with tooth and nail to get me the appropriate accommodations. But so I struggled with memory, just immense fatigue, reading and reading comprehension. Yeah, pretty much everything. I was also I constantly battled with overstimulation. So even if I might be able to do something in a quiet, enclosed environment, but when I was in a classroom and there were people moving or something on the board, those sorts of things were so distracting that I kind of shut down. It was really hard for me to socialize too for that reason. At my high school, a lunch period, everyone's out and about. I was a goner.
Absolutely. I think that's where some of your vestibular systems start to overlap with everything else. And I will say you were a little intimidating walking to the office because of how competitive you were with doing your homework. And you had been to vestibular therapy in the past. So you knew all about the Mars and ball. You knew about heart charts. You knew about all of this stuff. And you had this impressive setup at home of doing your home exercise programs and your home therapy. Do you want to touch on that at all?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things, so with earlier concussions, or I had an earlier concussion that took 4 to 5 months before I was back on the ice playing at an elite level. But it was very much a linear trajectory. And it was, I would say, a classic PCS case that once I was put in active rehabilitation, you saw a steady trajectory and a return to play. And I played the best hockey of my life in between that injury and then the slightly more catastrophic one. And so, particularly with an athlete, what active rehabilitation and vestibular therapy gives you are the tools to improve. It puts something back into your control. So instead of waiting, instead of tracking symptoms, and it gives you something to do and something that has a purpose. And by the time that I met you, I had been quite a ways around in terms of therapies and practitioners and experiences. And I'd also started to learn a lot of the science associated. And so I knew exactly why I was doing it. And so it was really important to me to build in the opportunities to do that when I was outside of the clinic, in the same way that, I shot pucks in the driveway or dribbled the soccer ball in the backyard. Recreating a vestibular therapy setting within reason is not that hard to do. And so I looked at that as an opportunity. I think, regardless of how things turned out in the past, 6.5 years since I get hurt, I don't think anyone can question my desire to get better. But I don't think that's something every patient can say. So that's something I take a lot of pride in. And it's just about putting forth that effort, because no one's going to make you better. And I think oftentimes in physical therapy, it would frustrate me to hear other people sort of complaining about things, but then you kind of knew they weren't doing their homework. Mm-hmm. Like, well, if they're giving you the tools, you have to at least try. Yeah, behavioral studies show that the more integrated something is into your surroundings, the more likely you are to actually do it. That's why you put reminders on the refrigerator, or at least I do. And so, using that sort of, in my bedroom, you wake up and you see it every day. That's why, even though it might be a little cliche, I kind of put up a board and it says, what did you do today to get better? I did a lot of rehab tracking so that I could track my progress in more real time than, every 6 weeks you do in a PT's office. And some might consider it obsessive, but I pretty much used the strategies that allowed me to become an excellent athlete, that and use those to recover.
I think you're right. In vestibular therapy and also just physical therapy in general, it's not our job to wave the magic wand and make you better. It's our job to figure out what's going on and give you the necessary tools to get you to a point where you can get yourself better. And especially with vestibular therapy, it's an everyday thing. You have to have consistency in order to see results. And you're right, not everybody has that motivation. A lot of people get discouraged easily, and they just kind of hope that coming into the appointments is all they need to do. But putting in that time, that perseverance, and really committing to your recovery is super important. And that's definitely something you have done 100%, 110%.
Yeah, I think that's one of our first conversations, Danny, that we have with our patients is, if you only do the work when you're here, you're not going to get better. The magic truly does happen within your home. And it's more rare that we have a patient or client like you where we have to rein them back. Usually we're encouraging them, no, comply to the homework, please.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, it's not really magic. I think that's something you have to appreciate. For most brain injury, to a point, it's functional. And so you're retraining, even if it has to be, new pathways, that's what you're doing. It's habituating your system to a degree, so that life becomes tolerable. And I will say that if life hadn't have been so nearly unbearable, I'm not sure if my drive would have been necessarily at the height that it was. I think it was certainly helped by the fact that I just was miserable and did not want to be miserable any longer. And I had a real deep desire to be a normal 20-something and to have a future. And so there are all sorts of driving forces that I think can help you find motivation. But I think it's really helpful for patients to really understand the why in their actions, because staring at a wall and shaking your head seems ridiculous. It seems ridiculous while you're doing it. But there's a lot going on there. And so I think that's something that perhaps clinicians can take away, and that taking the time, and it will take you a minute to actually explain to the level that a layperson can understand, really makes all the difference in the world. Mm-hmm. Because when you think of all the annoying things that you have to do in a day, if you don't understand why you're doing them, then you probably wouldn't do them. And so I think that's something to recognize, even if it will take you time and it requires a little bit of added effort. I think you'll see a lot increased patient compliance.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right in that. Education is huge, 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 huge. And we've talked about that in a couple of our episodes, that take the time to both listen to your patient, but also educate your patient, because you're absolutely right. If you don't know why you're doing it, it's not going to make any sense. It does sound like magic, right? If we treat something like beep and BV, or we tell someone to shake their head at a wall, they go, what the hell is this doing? It's not the most enticing or very exciting exercise to do. So if they at least know why they're doing it, you're definitely more likely to get them to be compliant and to work on their stuff at home.
And, not to mention, and we've touched on this in prior episodes, most people don't know they even have a vestibular system until something goes wrong, until symptoms present. So even going more basic, not just why you're doing this exercise, but what at the bare bones is your vestibular system and how is it impacting your everyday life, both pre and post vestibular dysfunction. So that's a really good point. Now, you have some really great tips and strategies that we've discussed earlier. Let's start talking about some symptom management strategies. What really got you through, especially when your symptoms were so intense they were nearly unbearable, or maybe they were unbearable?
A couple of things. So I don't know if it was the impact of the brain injury or, my perhaps unhealthy at times competitive fire, or my not being able to separate myself from my peers who were going through the college process. But especially early on, there was no disconnect between what I actually could do and what I should be doing. Because of that, when I went back to school, and even if it was only for an hour or two every day, I was still doing that and trying to do the work. And I sometimes question in retrospect whether or not it would have behooved me to give myself more time initially to really lay a foundation of recovery, unearth some of the things that were underlying, and then jump back into things. So I'll start there. But then, because I was doing this, and going into school and going into rehab, I mean, honestly, just tolerating rehab was tough. I had a bucket with my name on it to vomit in at the first couple of establishments, because that's just where we were. And so I didn't ever think that I wasn't going to stop living life. I honestly thought I'd still be playing Division I college hockey. And because of that, you needed a way to learn how to do life. And then as you move forward and you're not getting better, life carries on, and you need to, be a part of that, or else you're miserable. And the one thing that was drilled into my head repeatedly is, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And with the orthostatic intolerance, forcing myself to exercise, forcing myself to get out of bed every day, that was a huge and daunting task, but it needed to be done. So there was a necessary component of symptom management. And I would say over 6.5 years, you get really good at it. So there's certainly trial and error. I did not nail it right off the bat. But what I will say is that particularly with vestibular disorders, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a clinician, but nausea is a huge component. Dizziness is a huge component. And those are highly uncomfortable and distracting. I mean, you try and take an AP European history test while you're dizzy and nauseous, and you'll probably do worse than if you were feeling fine. And so the biggest savior to me in high school and early college was ginger gum. It's like over the counter. You can get it at CVS and Walgreens. I'm pretty sure it's made for chemotherapy patients and pregnant women, but I was like chewing a pack a day. I was an addict. And that stuff tastes terrible, but it really works. And so having these sorts of plans, another thing that was really important to me was early into my recovery, I was told or recommended to go see a mental health professional because, you know, I just had my like whole world ripped away from me and all of a sudden my brain didn't work. There's a lot going on there. And one of the things that, and the first match wasn't a great one, but the second one was really great because she was like, your life sucks. We know why. And so we're going to give you some strategies to sort of mitigate that. Things that are within your control. So one of those things that she told me was to like suck on a peppermint candy whenever you were feeling overwhelmed, and your ability to like focus on the taste and use mindfulness and deep breathing. She was the first person to introduce like the belly breath into my life. That really gave me a way to manage things. And then I later, thanks to the Love Your Brain Foundation, which is a fantastic organization, they really introduced mindfulness and meditation into my life, which gave me a way to, in the moment, find calm and to sort of be aware of the nausea, but not let it overwhelm me. Because one of the things that happened was when I would get nauseous or if I would throw up, like no one wants to be a weird pukey kid or a weird fainty kid in high school. That's about the worst thing you can do. And then in college actually puking is normalized because of drinking culture, but it was really bad in high school. And so once I started feeling badly, I would get terrified that I was going to like throw up in the middle of class. Cause again, there's nothing more mortifying than that. And you know, I'm a teenage girl. I've got things to worry about. And so, like meditation and mindfulness and being able to breathe were really useful strategies for me. And being able to like keep the nausea as nausea and not let it turn into panic. Because particularly, especially like when the world is swimming around you and you're like holding onto the walls, you don't fall over in the middle of the high school hallways, because high school hallways are not only filled with people, they are lined with lockers. It is literally the worst type of environment for someone with a vestibular disorder. But having that sort of like feeling grounded. So oftentimes what I would do is like if you put your back to the wall and just like lean into something. So I knew that like my left side felt better than my right side in terms of like proprioceptive ability. So if you like if I leaned with my left side against the locker, take a couple of deep breaths, able to ground yourself. Because with vestibular issues in general, like it's a lack of knowing where you are in space. So being able to find a way to find where you are in space, if that makes sense, is really helpful. Befriending the nurse, also really helpful. Those are some of my tips. It really sort of, it's a trial and error process and depending what works for you. But I think an ability to breathe and manage sort of the nausea and the environment as best you can is really important. That was a lot. Sorry.
No, but that's even just the tip of the iceberg. I know that managing symptoms is going to be different from person to person. And it's just really important to have something in your toolbox to be able to utilize. So anybody struggling might take at least 1, 2, 3 of those tips and be able to put them to really good use. But you're right. Everything you said is dead on, and things that we do with our patients, especially the mindfulness. I can't believe how many times I've recommended the Insight Timer app or a couple of the other different mindfulness apps and grounding practices, and even body mapping is a new one that I've been doing more with patients just so that they have a better awareness of their body and where they are when they're lying on the table if I'm working on their neck or something like that. So those are, amazing tips to give. And, you've also mentioned about putting yourself and your health first. The world is busy and we have a lot of different things in our lives, but why don't you kind of expand a little bit about, what you had to do to take that step to put your health first, put it up on a pedestal?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to when you're trying to recover from a brain injury, you need to create a foundation that allows for healing. And that's, if you think about it, even just on a metabolic level, you have to have the right nutrients, the right energy. When you think about how, the science shows that, brains need sleep. for starters, and we live in a sleep deprived and dark deprived society. So prioritizing good sleep, good nutrition, knowing when like enough is enough in terms of socializing. I mean, again, so I was 16, I think, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, 16 when I got hurt, and I'm 22, almost 23 now. And so when you are this young, one, everyone is healthy and just anticipates being healthy forever, and people think they're invincible. And two, there's a lot of social pressure to go out and do stuff, usually stupid stuff, and especially in college. And so you have to be willing to, say no to pizza at midnight and, eat your vegetables, even though your mom's not there in college to tell you, and things like that. And the sleep is a huge thing. So I have, after freshman year, which is when I met Danielle, I had a really rough go of my winter term. I ended up getting like jaundice, had cranial nerve inflammation, a couple other bad things. And I had not felt good the entire year. It was pretty much just holding on. And that's because I was pushing too hard. And I was so desperate, I think, to fit in that I didn't prioritize my health in every capacity. And then since then, I've learned that, going to bed at 10 makes me functional and allows me to succeed and allows me to be present with my friends during the daytime. And, and so that's something that it took me a while to learn, but I think is really important because, again, if you're asking your brain to do a lot of work and to regain function and rebuild function, and you need to give it the proper fuel and the proper environment. I mean, think about a plant. Like, nothing's going to grow if you put it in a bunch of rocks and put it in a Michigan winter. Like, that's not going to work. And so you need to sort of lay the foundation for healing, and be willing to prioritize that, because, again, you're not going to get better without it. And so I think that it's a matter of just like putting it up on that pedestal. And I'm not saying never have fun. Like, trust me, I have fun. And when I do have fun, it's deliberate and intentional. And I'm very, it's a meaningful moment for me. And so it's just a matter of balancing, but making sure that if you go out one night, that you really make sure that you have a day where you can rest and recover. And so that way you can sort of keep the balance.
Now, with the social pressures and the school pressures and the family pressures, what would you say about the support that you received? Was it adequate and helpful? Did friends accept, no, I'm not getting pizza at midnight? Talk to us about that.
So there are a couple of different things. First, with my family, I think like I've grown with the injury, they have as well. And I think that's important to recognize, both in our understanding of what it meant and how I was going to react to it, but and how they should best support me. I think there was a learning curve. I'll say my brother has been my rock through the whole thing. He's my first phone call with any problem. It's been that way for a long time now. He's amazing. And he went to Michigan for college too. And I don't think my parents would have been nearly as comfortable with me going away if he wasn't there. And my sister also, she's younger than me, but she drives me around because I still don't have a driver's license. It's a whole nother thing. My parents, I think my mom was really, took me to all the doctor's appointments and everything. And my dad worked really hard to ensure that I had access to every possible lane of care. I will say that I strained my parental relationships because, to put it bluntly, I was an asshole to be around for a little bit. I was in a lot of pain and I wasn't very good at communicating. And I was not a good person. And I don't know how much is a function of like pain versus a function of like the injury itself and any sort of personality changes that ensued. But I also think that there were some elements of my parents kind of wanting the old me back before that could appear. But again, it's something that you grow with. And I think that we're a really close-knit family to begin with, and even more so now. With my friends, it was interesting because when I got hurt, I was 16, which means when I got hurt, they were 16. And so I think that's a really challenging thing to ask any teenager to handle well. And I know this now. I wasn't as keenly aware of it then. My teammates, I didn't feel, I felt a little bit abandoned at the time. And with my school friends, so like I would miss weeks of school at a time for various reasons, or I'd only be there for a day or two. And I would like show back up at school, and like the kid sitting in front of me in world history class would like turn around and be like, "Hey, do you have the homework from last night?" And I'd be like, "I haven't been here for 6 weeks." Like, and I like no one noticed. But I think something that I've come to understand is that, especially when you're a teenager, you just have so much going on, and I was not the center of anyone's world. And so I think I understand that now. And the couple of friends, and there were only a handful, because once you disappear, like it takes a lot for people, out of sight, out of mind. Like we're very close, and I think those will be friends I carry with me for a long time. And then with college, people got a whole nother side of it, because they were living with me too. And I would say I have a very close knit of friends in college who I told pretty early on, because there were a bunch of things that I do that were just going to be weird, and they would figure out something was strange with me sooner or later. Between like, I don't know, the fact that I carry a pharmacy in my backpack, or just things that I do. And so they were super accepting and really blew me away, because I hadn't had such a positive experience with high school. And like my friends organized carpools to like drive me to doctor's appointments. And, when I got sick, they would like bring me peanut butter sandwiches from the dining hall because I couldn't go down there, and stuff like that. So I really had help. And I'm also really grateful to the academic support I've gotten at Michigan. My academic advisor, like I would have dropped out after one semester if I hadn't have gotten to know him really well. And so I think it's a matter of telling the right people, and vulnerability is often met with vulnerability. So I think that played a role. And then also recognizing like the relative maturity of your counterparts. So do I get chided sometimes for being a loser that goes to a 10? Yeah. But do they recognize how special it is when I go out like that, one time a month? Yeah. And they make a big deal, and we always have a blast. So I think I have a pretty good balance. And I wouldn't change anything about my friends.
I feel like it had to take some time in order to get to the point where you're at. Going through your symptoms for 6 years now, there had to have been some struggles in the beginning. But how did you keep that drive? How did you keep that persistence to continue working on your care and driving towards feeling better?
Well, I think that there have been many, 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 many low points. And like my friends, some of whom I referenced, like, and my brother, like they know who they are. Like they get the late night texts, or like the I don't know if I can do this anymore type of moments, and just in that like frustration way. And I think what it comes down to is an innate belief that it can be better. I think the fact that I started with an amazing clinician, Dr. Nate Kaiser in Michigan. He's one of the best things to come out of my attending Michigan. He, met me sophomore year of college, and we were able to make just absolutely incredible improvement with my like autonomic nervous system, and the pairing of my ocular motor system and my vestibular system and my neck and everything, like to actually integrate them really well and things like that. So I was making marked strides, and we were, 4, 5, and now 6 years out. And that is really indicative of the brain's ability to be plastic and to heal. And so I think there is a line between being extraordinarily grateful for the fact that I can walk around my block. And in fact, I ran like a couple miles today, like it was no big deal, because I exercise every day. And like I'm the same person that, struggled to make it around the corner, a couple years ago. So I think you can have immense gratitude without having satisfaction about where you are now. That was something I really actually recently reflected on with the new year, because with COVID, things have kind of been at a standstill, and I've been doing like the things that I do to feel good every day. But I haven't necessarily been seeking out ways to feel better. But when push comes to shove, I do not match the typical 22-year-old for for energy and stamina. I still don't have a driver's license, for instance. And so you really have to ask yourself, what's missing? What can you do? And so I think that, again, it's not that I'm not grateful for the incredible progress I wasn't guaranteed, but I think that you just have to never be satisfied.
Yeah. I mean, you're such an inspiration. I just love listening to you talk. All these questions and answers, they're so good. One of the things that you had mentioned in prior conversation is recognizing the small wins or the victory of the day. And how does that impact your ability to stay motivated, driven, hopeful, inspired?
Oh yeah, I can't believe I forgot to mention this. And I knew that question teed that up. Man, I see it now. That's like my thing. Okay, so a couple of different things. The first thing is when people tell me that they struggle to maintain a positive outlook, one of my first go-tos is to say that I bet you can find one good thing about today. And that can be anything from, today I ran a 5K today and it was it was like 50 degrees and we're in January now. So that's absurd. And it was just an absolutely great experience. I had really good tunes. My sister redid my running playlist and they're amazing. I just had a great run. That's a great victory for today. That's a good thing from today. But it can also be as simple as I opened the jar of peanut butter and no one had touched it yet. So it was really smooth on top. And you just sit there for a moment. And, pre-COVID, I lived in a house with 7 college kids. So you rarely got peanut butter that wasn't touched. And so you can really appreciate that moment. And that's something completely external. So I think I challenge people to find a victory in every day. And I also would say that celebrating the small wins was something I had to really learn. The example I like to talk about is when I first passed my walking evaluation, which was congratulations, you can walk without being held onto in the PT room. I got rid of my neon band. I was all of a sudden a free woman. And it was really exciting stuff. So I was 16, 17, and was previously an elite ice hockey player who, could skate. And all of a sudden we were celebrating walking correctly. I could always walk. It was just the walking correctly part. And with really good, trustworthy balance. And so I could choose to be absolutely just devastated by this and be wow, this sucks. We're now celebrating walking. That's pathetic. Or I could be yay, go walking. And so regardless of your circumstances, you have this choice in choosing how to react to a situation. And because regardless, I was in the exact same spot. So I chose the celebratory version because it seemed like a lot more fun. And so that's sort of how I've taken things. And it's something that I wasn't necessarily prone to. I think I tried to downplay things like as a young kid in soccer, I was always taught to act like you've been there before and to never celebrate a goal. So I was never a kid to run around the field. And in fact, my hockey coach once, he was like, you scored, why aren't you celebrating? You never score. Because I started playing defense and I was a low goal scorer. So maybe not so good at hockey as I would have thought. He's like, why aren't you celebrating? And so it wasn't something that came naturally to me, but now I really embrace. And my freshman year roommate, one of my best friends at school, got into Yale today for grad school. And I was like, we are celebrating. This is amazing. And so that's a huge victory. That's not a small victory. But I think life presents you opportunities to celebrate, and we shouldn't pass those by.
Congratulations to your friend, for one.
Yeah.
And two, outside of a vestibular podcast, that's great life advice right there. Celebrate the small wins, find a victory and something good in every day. I'll tell you, my good for today is having this interview. It's so fun.
Yeah.
But, as we think about recovery too, yes, there are some crazy exercises that we prescribe. And I'm sure Danny came up with some really creative things for you to do in your program with her. But also, life is one big vestibular exercise, right?
Yes.
Pretty much. So talk to us a little bit about how you embraced and implemented different life activities that you enjoy to also help in your recovery.
So this was not my idea in the first place, but it was something that embraced it. I don't remember who was the first clinician to tell me about this concept, but they were basically like, you can stare at this, X on the wall forever. And we can put a busy background up there and ask you to stand on one leg and do all your little tricks. But it's not going to emulate life. Because when, again, you're a young person, you've got your whole life ahead of you. And, I wanted to be able to ride in the car and go to the grocery store and go to the mall with my friends and go to prom. That was like one thing I really was working towards and looking forward to. Combine those just now. And so I began to see, the world as opportunities to train the vestibular system. And I found that if it was something that I enjoyed doing, I would tolerate it for longer. So huge bias there. And so what I ended up doing was, so I have a history of loving grocery shopping, and that could be a whole podcast in and of itself. But that became like one of the things that I did. And so I would go with my mom, and sometimes I'd only be in the store for a few minutes. Sometimes I'd have to leave. And other times I would do the whole shopping spree, and she would give me tasks. And it was like this combination of, cognitive retraining. There is nothing more sinister for someone with a vestibular disorder than a grocery store, because you've got aisles, you have fluorescent lights, you have people moving down the aisles, then you have aisles lined with, every single label you can think of. And so I was really into cooking and food, and I still am. And so that was just like a fun way for me to really mess with it. And next to the grocery store, my English classroom was fine. And so again, it was like this comparative system, and that once you were sort of putting yourself in these real world situations, it was habituating your system to not necessarily be comfortable in them, because I was not comfortable, but I could tolerate it and breathe through it. And to me, going to the grocery store and taking a lot of deep breaths was way more fun than being tortured by Danielle. Sorry.
Also, like that time you had to go down to a certain parade after a certain hockey team won the Stanley Cup, I remember.
How did I forget about that? Yeah, so I'm a big hockey fan, obviously. So going to the Caps game, and there's a way to control the environment. So again, I was a young person, and I would want to do fun things. And there was a long time where I did not do anything fun. But then I started, building up a tolerance to things. And so, I would like get an aisle seat, so that way you were clear on one side. And you would sit, like, I always was in, my dad would splurge the big dollars and go like lower bowl, because that way I would have to see less. Also, my brother benefited because he got to go too. Or my dad's work also has a suite, and so then you're actually insulated from the game, but you still get to see it. With concerts, my first concert back from no fun ever was, I made sure it was outside. It was like a country music concert. It was like $20 a ticket, with my really good friend Ariel, who was well trained in the ways of Sarah and knew that at 10:50 we were booking it out of there. And she was really well prepared and supportive. And so, but I did an outdoor concert because the noise would escape. We were on the lawn, so that way there was tons of fresh air, and you were like far away from a lot of everything. And, it was a good way to sort of balance the desire to have fun, to have an experience, but then also managing your symptoms. And then over time you build up. And, I went to a Michigan game in the Big House, and I can't say it was totally enjoyable for me, not only because Michigan football is so questionable these days, but because it is really the absolute worst environment. That is, okay, I stand corrected. The grocery store is like a cakewalk compared to the Big House. But, it was important to me to experience those things. And so, the first game ever, I was not doing so hot after one quarter. And my friend, it was his first football game of his Michigan career too, but he walked me home because he didn't want me to walk alone. And that was just a good example of not only a good friend, but of an example of a terrible vestibular experience. But it was also like you force yourself to do these things because it ultimately builds up a tolerance. And yeah, the Caps parade, I was going to miss that for the world.
To our listeners, there is such thing called graded exposure, and that's really what we encourage as therapists. Maybe not 0 to 100, but 0, 10, 20, 30, and so forth. But side note, I don't know if you had this show around when you were younger, because we're both a bit older than you, but you will love that this show is coming back around. It's called Supermarket Sweep, and you should sign up.
Okay, I will. In fact, I was just discussing, like, Friday afternoons, my housemates would always go to grocery stores to get our food for the week. And we're college kids. We have to eat all the time, really. And that was like the thing I looked forward to throughout the whole week. Friday afternoon grocery shopping with your friends. And it was just the greatest thing ever. Yeah, that's exposing myself as such a nerd, but it's so true. It's my number one missed thing about the pandemic. You can't just like leisurely stroll through the grocery store and go visit like 4 of them because you want certain things from each one. Yeah, so that's how I spend my Fridays.
Supermarket Sweep, look it up.
All right, I will.
When it comes to sporting events, you made some really good points that I actually hadn't thought of before. But another tip that I tell people who want to enjoy some sort of live event like that, hopefully they come back one of these days. But when it comes to position of your seat, although it's not most desirable to be at the end, if you're at the end of a football or hockey or whatever stadium or arena, you're not moving your head so much side to side to track the puck or the football or the basketball. It's more in front of you. You're able to see. So that's another little tip or trick for anyone out there who is trying to get back into the swing of things in that realm, sporting events, live events in general.
Yeah, and also to move, because even if you're that's why aisle seats are really key, because like you don't want to sit down for too long, because you get like stiff, or I get stiff. That's definitely not normal, but it happens to me. So being able to sort of move, even though you're that jerk that like keeps making people stand up, especially at a sporting event. Obviously, if you're going to like theater, yeah, that's probably not a good move, but just sort of being able to do that and sort of embracing your weirdness. I think it took me a very long time to own it. I was really embarrassed and I tried to hide it, especially when I went to college. I had this like weird thing where I thought that I would just magically move 8 hours away and I would be cured and everything would be fine. It was a delusion. And so to just sort of embrace that you have to do certain things to feel good and know that that's like important for you. And real friends will stick through whatever weirdness you throw their way.
There was something you mentioned, you had touched on earlier that actually kind of really resonated with me, was that you had to work really hard to make life tolerable again. It wasn't getting back to your old self. It wasn't getting back to being completely normal. It was finding a way to make life tolerable, to find the new normal. And I think that, that's something that a lot of people really need to take into consideration when they're reflecting on their own path to recovery. Because something even as insignificant or something as serious, you're probably not going to have a 100% recovered outcome. The fact that you might need to make some adjustments to life in order to do the things that you want to do is important. The fact that you are able to go to a football game and go to the Caps parade and do all those things, while a little uncomfortable to put it lightly, you still got to go. You still got to be there for those times in your life. And that's important to look back on and to enjoy, but also taking things into moderation. You do your one night out a month instead of going out, 4 nights a week with your friends, like you probably want to. Having that realization of what your realistic goals are, I think is important for your recovery and kind of tracking your progress, because you can focus on the small wins at that point. Somebody who's not focusing on the small wins might look at being symptomatic at a game and go, that was terrible, I felt horrible, but they don't focus on the fact that they were there and they got to be there for half the game or be there with their friends for part of the time. So I think that you've embraced that really well, of finding a way to be happy with what you're able to do at this point in time while still pushing forward.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for, I don't know who was the first person to tell me, and I absolutely rejected it for the first like 6 months after hearing it. But the need to grieve your former self, and that like we're probably working with Sarah 3 or 4.0 by now. But hopefully each time with improvements. But yeah, you can't ever go back. And even if you regain all physical abilities, just having been through the experience, you change fundamentally, I think. And so even if it's just appreciating things for a new time, like for the first time, like going to a grocery store is so special for me because it was something I actually practiced. And it's the same thing with school. Like I have tried my best, and anyone listening this who really knows me will definitely hold me accountable, to never complain about like a late night in the library or like class in general. I would say with Zoom U, it's been challenging to really keep this, but because like college for me was not guaranteed, and I really had to work hard. And like I remember practicing like reading like ACT prep books and like doing calculus at my kitchen table in like the time I took between high school and college, and then like I'd walk a half mile like around this loop and then come back and like try and read again because that would simulate going to class and things like that. And like I actually trained to go to school, and so I try not to take that for granted, and sort of being in touch with like who you were, and sort of carrying with you the good parts, but hopefully improving through personal experience along the way. I think that's really important to sort of keep in mind, because I think, and it'll take you a long time. Like I think it probably took a year and a half before I was ready to let go of the fact that I wasn't going to be the athlete anymore. But one thing that I would like to share that's been really exciting for me, and you might even find interesting from a vestibular therapy perspective, is over the summer before last summer, the summer of 2019, the pre-pandemic summer, was I got into, at the recommendation of Dr. Kaiser in Michigan, rock climbing, because it's proprioceptively demanding, it's cognitively demanding, it's safe in that you're strapped up, you're not really going to fall. Like it's actually one of the safer things I've done, even though it sounds counterintuitive because it's rock climbing, indoor rock climbing, I should say. But it's challenging, it is incredibly strenuous, and you're limited by your grip. So the first thing that's going to fail is your hands, which allows you to build up slowly. Then it also works all of your posture muscles. It's an incredible core workout. And it's the first time that I have felt like saliently athletic, and it was awesome. And the community is there and people cheer you on and you go. And so that's something that I did up until the pandemic and really grew with and greatly enjoyed as this alternate activity that was really beneficial to me from a therapeutic perspective, but also really got me back in touch with being that athlete, and then starting to get back in the gym again and finding, what makes me happy. Because that's really like, I just love games, and love sports and love fitness. And so that was really important. And I think knowing what's important to you, you usually don't have to say goodbye to it. You just have to look for it in a different light. And I think that's also something really important to take away.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. You are such an incredible woman, and I've really enjoyed hearing your story, hearing your tips, hearing your motivation for anyone out there listening. Can you leave us with some more information about a few things you touched on earlier, Headway Foundation and the Love Your Brain Mindset program?
Yeah. So I guess first, if you really, if you really like my tips, I do have my own podcast. It's called How to Student, and while it's targeted at college kids, Danny has decided that it is useful for everyone, and I do think so as well. And it's got tips. I interview guests and also interject my own, I'll put air quotes around wisdom.
I'll endorse it. It is a fantastic show. Again, it doesn't have to be just applicable to students. You can take a lot of what the tips that you've put out there. I've been using a lot of your tips actually from some of your episodes. Especially loved your first episode right off the bat with Dr. Nate Kaiser. And I think you kind of motivated anybody who listened to that episode to get into rock climbing. Because listening to the two of you talk about it, I was like, well, I could do that. Like as soon as everything starts opening up, I'm going to jump in. But you should absolutely listen to How to Student because it is applicable across the board. And I do highly recommend your podcast. It's phenomenal and produced well in levels above ours of what we put together here. So make sure you get on there and listen to that.
Thank you. It's also my honors capstone project for the University of Michigan. So at the very least, download it so that I can have more people for when I present it to the committee. So Headway Foundation is a fantastic nonprofit organization, which was founded by athletes who had career-altering or career-ending concussions. And we function off of 3 pillars: awareness, aid, and advocacy. We offer a peer support network, an annual concussion awareness event, which last year had over 4,000 student athletes involved across high school, youth, and college teams. And I personally designed the educational curriculum, and we have a great academic or medical advisory team. And while I've had to take a step back while I focus on my studies and some other goals and endeavors, the team over there have done a great job carrying forth. And if you've had a concussion, definitely check them out. And one of the reasons why I wanted to help start Headway was because my injury would have, I'd probably be fine right now and would have been fine way long time ago if I hadn't continued to play with a suspected injury. And so it's, part of Headway's mission is to ensure that doesn't happen for the next generation of athletes. And then the Love Your Brain Foundation is an absolutely incredible organization. I really think they saved my life, and I definitely wouldn't sound so positive if I hadn't come across them. And I don't say that lightly. And they are based out of Vermont, started by former Olympic snowboarder Kevin Pierce and his brother Adam. Kevin had a near fatal snowboarding crash while training for the 2010 Vancouver Olympics. And they offer retreat programs and yoga and mindfulness training for people who've had traumatic brain injury. And also they do programming for their caregivers. I'm currently one of the facilitators or co-facilitators for their mindset program, which was their reaction to the current pandemic situation. It's a completely free 6-week mindset training course where you get to interact with other people affected by traumatic brain injury, learn yoga and meditation, and it's all remote via Zoom, which hopefully everyone is now too familiar with. So yeah, and I guess if you want to just follow me as me, I'm on social media as SRen20.
SRen, REN 20.
Yep. On Instagram.
Sounds good.
We'll be sure to link all of that information in our show notes too. So we'll include the websites and some of the things that we touched on. Sarah, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate your time and all of the wisdom you had to bestow on us.
Oh, this was fun. So thank you for having me. And I think many people would find it hard to believe I had wisdom.
You did amazing. And like I said, the knowledge that you shared can be extrapolated beyond just vestibular dysfunction. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to everyone for listening. Make sure you download How to Student. So Sarah, when she presents it, looks like the amazing woman she is.
Thank you. This was a blast.
Thank you all. See you next week.
If you're interested in finding us on social media or the web, you can visit www.vestibular.today for more resources, including testing, treatment, and educational videos, blogs, continuing education classes, and resources including clinic equipment recommendations, suggested tests, and BPPV treatment charts.
Search Vestibular Today and Balancing Act Rehab on all social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Also, be sure to check out Balancing Act Rehab at www.balancingactrehab.com, especially if you think you would benefit from vestibular therapy. We are your girls. The information on this podcast is not intended to replace the care provided by your qualified health professional or to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on Talk Dizzy to Me. Please contact us at Balancing Act Rehab if you think you could benefit from vestibular therapy.